All right, everyone, welcome. Very glad to have you all here. My name is Sarah Deal, and I am a senior researcher with a company called DVP Praxis, and I am also a research affiliate with the Belk Center for Community College Leadership Engagement, Leadership and Research, and I will have my co-presenter introduce herself as well.
Good morning, everyone. I'm AJ Jaeger. I am the Executive Director of the Belk Center at NC State, as well as the W. Dallas Herring Professor of Community College Education. Great to have you all here.
So in our session description, we had talked about this being a collaborative session, but if we've learned anything from the past year and a half, it's about being flexible and nimble. And so we will not be able to hear your voices today, but the chat will be monitored. So there will be times that we'll pause and have you all give some input into some questions that we have for you all. And so we encourage you to participate in the chat so that we can have a discussion about this. So it's great to be here with you all today. And what we're going to share with you are some findings and most importantly, some discussion and some implications stemming from my dissertation research about the promise of free college, the dual enrollment program in North Carolina, which, as many of you know, is provided to students at no tuition costs. Today, we're going to focus in on the career and technical pathway and its importance as a potential equity solution in North Carolina's dual enrollment program, and importantly, engage you all via chat in conversation about the meaning of these results and potential actions that we can take to improve post-secondary outcomes for all students. Spoiler alert, the main result of my research was that the promise of free college is realized, particularly for Hispanic and low-income students in the North Carolina dual enrollment system. And my research showed that participation in this program, Career and College Promise, or CCP, is associated with increased post-secondary attainment for students who participate. And so the students who participate part is really important, and we'll get to that in a second. There are participation gaps, though, for some groups of underrepresented students, which really presents an opportunity for the program to extend its benefits further. And so we're not here to do anything but look for solutions to how we can make these great benefits apply to more students. So you all probably know a little bit about the work of dual enrollment, but just to cover my bases, in our country, the value of college is increasing, and college is one of the ways for Americans to ensure that they have job stability and can earn family-sustaining wages. However, we see, and in COVID, we see this even more, that enrollment is declining across the country. And this is particularly true for low income and first generation and other students who are historically not well served by our institutions. At the same time, though, there's this increased need for skilled labor. And so in North Carolina, the My Future NC group has done a lot of research on this and showed that in 2020, 67% of the jobs required this post-secondary credential, but only 50% of the North Carolina population had that credential. So there's this gap, while at the same time, college enrollment is decreasing. And in order to meet that need for North Carolinians to hold a post-secondary credential that meets the needs of the labor workforce and serves the students of North Carolina set this goal of 2 million additional, or 2 million residents to have the post-secondary credential by 2030. And one of the arguments is that dual enrollment is a really great way, one really great strategy to help meet this goal, especially because it's free for students who participate. So one of the potential reasons for this is that there's this divide between high school and college. There's differing exposure to college-going culture within the high schools. Students' academic readiness to succeed in college-level coursework differs, and so that's readiness for both math and English, but also the different type of work that occurs in the college setting and the different expectations that college faculty have for their students. And then there's these federal policies aimed at helping students succeed. So the No Child Left Behind Act and the subsequent Every Student Succeeds Act. And all of those policies, all of this work is really to help students be more academically successful, but they don't necessarily map to each other. So the policies in high school don't necessarily always translate over as the student transitions to the college environment. And dual enrollment can be a potential solution to this because during high school, students are earning college credit that also counts toward their high school graduation requirements. From a social perspective, they are learning about the norms and the expectations of those college faculty that we spoke about a few minutes ago. They get practice with that rigorous college level curriculum and the differing expectations. And this provides students the ability to anticipate challenges so that by the time that they get to the college environment, they already sort of have a flavor of what might be expected of them and how they can navigate that environment. And so our first discussion question is on the screen, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jaeger to facilitate some conversation.
Well, we know that there's a bit of a lag time in between when things are posted on the chat, and we might get those posts, but we really are interested in getting questions from you and thinking more about this, how does DE, dual enrollment, bridge that high school divide? Based upon what can we take advantage of to the fullest potential when we think about dual enrollment opportunities and our college going culture, who's not going to college now? Are we missing anything? What should we be thinking about? So Mary is going to, our session host, read off chat comments when they come in, but given that we've been focusing on dual enrollment for this conference, it's likely that you've been thinking about what are the ways in which we can really remove the barrier from high school to college through DE.
Let's go ahead and advance to some other discussion quickly, because it looks like currently our chat function is disabled since we're actually in a live session. And so we're going to get that enabled, and we'll come back to these questions.
Okay, no problem. We have even more exciting questions to come, so we'll move forward.
All right, so some of you, maybe all of you, are familiar with the Career and College Promise program, but again, to cover my bases, in case there's anyone in the audience who's not familiar, I wanted to share a little bit about the policy in North Carolina. So the present day Career and College Promise program, I'll also refer to it as CCP, is North Carolina's dual enrollment program, and the present legislation was passed in 2012. And the goals were sort of broadly to increase access to college for underserved populations, increase the number of students earning a degree, fill the anticipated workforce gap, and help North Carolinians earn a family sustaining wage. And then the goal of all of that would be if more North Carolinians are earning a family sustaining wage and have good jobs, but that will also increase the tax base, and that those additional revenue would feed back into the program and it would become self-supporting. Key aspects of this program are that students earn college credit during high school, and these classes also meet high school graduation requirements. So the student doesn't lose any time toward high school graduation. CCP is also made up of two pathways. There's the college transfer pathway, which is a grouping of general education courses like math and English and psychology meant to transfer either to finish that associate's degree at the community college or to one of North Carolina's 16 public institutions. And there's some agreements in place to do that. And the other pathway, which we'll focus on today, is the career and technical pathway. And so that's really a curriculum aligned with industry in the local area, industry recognized standards, and really meant to lead to a job. It could also lead to a career, and many career and transfer pathway students do transfer and earn a bachelor's degree. But it is also meant that a student could complete that and enter the workforce. The program is funded by the legislature. And so, as I mentioned, students who participate don't pay tuition costs, though we recognize there are other costs to attending college, like supplies and transportation. The program is open to North Carolina juniors and seniors, but there is legislation that does allow some programs to be open to freshmen and sophomores in certain programs. The admissions requirements are, during my study, it was a 3.0. So the group of students that we'll talk about today, the admission requirement was a 3.0. We know that today that the present day standard is a 2.8 to align with North Carolina's move toward co-requisite remediation in the community colleges. Students have to demonstrate readiness in math and English, and they have to complete the college application. So specifically about the career and technical pathway, I shared a little bit that it leads to an industry recognized credential. So for example, North Carolina requires that welders be certified, and completion of this pathway would give students the skills to be a certified welder. Technical education pathway is also a structured pathway where students know what classes to take and in what order. So there's not a lot of class choice. And so while there's not a lot of choice, that actually helps students see the end goal. So they begin the pathway with the end in mind, and they know exactly what they have to take and in what timeline to reach their ultimate academic goal within this pathway. Additionally, technical pathways often include these stackable credentials where a student can earn a short-term certificate that's embedded within the longer pathway, and they can earn that sometimes in as little as one semester. And those certifications usually count toward that associate's degree, that larger credential. So some things that the research tells us that we know about the impact of students who participate in dual enrollment nationally. So it's anticipated that dual enrollment has the effect on post-secondary outcomes, increases college enrollment, and that happens at both the 2- and 4-year colleges. Research shows that it also increases persistence, so that's students staying enrolled in college as they work toward completing their degree, and students are more likely to complete that credential as a result of participating in dual enrollment. And that's often a function of it saving time, so an efficiency with time and an efficiency with money, in addition to some of those other benefits that you all, I know, were just dying to put in the chat earlier about all the ways that dual enrollment can bridge the high school to college divide. There are a bit of differential effects though when dual enrollment, though it increases post-secondary attainment, lower income students still, attainment rates still lag behind higher income students in some of the national research. And we certainly see that in North Carolina too. So a little bit about the data so that you can sort of orient yourself to who we are talking about today. So the big research question was, what is the relationship between CCP and post-secondary attainment? In my dissertation, I focused on 3 different essays that contributed to this question. And they were all around high school juniors in the academic year 2015-16 who were eligible to participate in 16-17 and 17-18. The students in this study remained in the same high school during the duration of that whole time. So there's no movers. Students didn't move high school. They were all traditional high school students. There weren't early colleges or charter schools because those function fundamentally different. And we really wanted to narrow in on this sort of large population of students that take the dual enrollment classes at their traditional high school. And we followed this sample through the 2018-2019 academic year, pulling data from North Carolina's P20 longitudinal database that combines data from the Department of Public Instruction, the North Carolina Community College system, and some of the data from the UNC system, though it was very new at the time, so we didn't necessarily have complete data for UNC outcomes. And because of that, most of my observable information was within the community college system. And this resulted in a sample size of 82,816 students. So for those of you in the audience who are interested in the methods, I will cover this very briefly, and then we'll sort of move on. So for the career and transfer, the college, I'm messing it up. For the technical education pathway, these were the 2 methods that I used. The first was a descriptive analysis, which used OLS or regression methods to predict the relationship between participating in CCP and post-secondary attainment. And that looked at those outcomes compared to the broader population of all high school juniors and seniors in North Carolina. I looked at descriptive data to see if CCP caused an increase in college access for underrepresented student populations, and if those trends in participation and enrollment in CCP, how they compared to trends nationally. I included a set of student level controls, so controlling for gender, race, ethnicity, and participation in the free and reduced lunch program as a proxy for income, socioeconomic status. I included a set of school level controls, which are at the high school level, including school performance grade score, percent of participation of students, four-year cohort graduation rate, and student to teacher ratio. And then I also included county level controls, knowing that things differ greatly across counties, in particular in North Carolina. So using some census data, included rurality designations established by the state, employment rate, total number of households, mean household income. So that's sort of the descriptive analysis part. And then I used a second method called instrumental variables, which sort of briefly looks at a random event in the environment. My methods instructors would be loving that that's how I refer to it, but a random event that is naturally occurring that helps randomize students. And fortunately in North Carolina, one of the key parts of establishing the North Carolina community college system was that every student would be within 30 minutes of a community college. And as you can see from this map, which is the map of all of the different main campuses of the 58 community colleges, they are pretty equidistributed. And so this paper uses an instrumental variables technique to control for any of those other variables that might be impacting a student's participation in dual enrollment that we can't capture by controlling for things like race, ethnicity, school, or county. Some of the assumptions of this method are that the completion of some college credit will increase the chances of a student continuing to enroll in college, and that students who begin college through dual enrollment are likely to complete their credential. And you can actually test that methodologically. So I tested that there is, in fact, for 99% of the students in North Carolina, there is a college within 30 miles. And this says that the distance between the high school and the community college is as good as random. So you can then use that randomization to carve out a subset of students and look at then the causal impact of participation in dual enrollment on post-secondary outcomes. So that was the quickest way to describe that, but there's certainly a lot more to it, and I will just continue to move on for the sake of time.
And as we're moving on real quickly, our chat feature is now enabled. So if you are not able to see that chat feature, you might need to, participants, you might need to refresh your page, but we can, as we're going through this, we can readjust again and be nimble and move on from there.
Thank you, Mary. And I think that I might be able to see the chat. I have it pulled up on my screen, so if folks want to say hello, I'd certainly welcome that. So in this study, just briefly what I saw as far as participation rates, and I promise we're coming up to another discussion question very soon. I saw that participation in CCP in North Carolina is overrepresented by students who identify as female when compared to the larger high school population. I see that in addition, when looking at participation by race and ethnicity, my data show that students who participate in CCP are more likely to be white or Caucasian and less likely to be African American, Black, and Hispanic, again, when compared to their percent of the population in North Carolina. And then when looking at the free and reduced lunch status as a proxy for income, I see that CCP students are generally from families that are higher income compared to their share of the population. And this is not different than other states or trends nationally. And so that is, North Carolina is not, doing quote unquote worse than any other state, but that means that there is a lot of great opportunity for us to affect this and to provide it to more students. When I look at these demographic trends by pathway, we can see here that transfer pathway, the general education pathway, is really driving that demographic makeup of the Career and College Promise program overall, where female, white, and higher income students are participating at higher rates. And perhaps most notably, students in the college transfer pathway have a much higher GPA than their peers in the career and technical pathway. But what's most interesting about this slide is that the technical education student demographic makeup really reflects the population makeup of North Carolina. And so that's why we're focusing in on the CTE pathway today, since it reflects the demographic makeup of our state. So in the chat, I will turn it over to Dr. Jaeger, and we'll spend about 10 minutes sort of chatting about this discussion question.
Well, as Sarah mentioned, North Carolina is similar to other states in the country in terms of our participation patterns, but really wanted to get your thoughts about what does it mean if our dual enrollment programs are typically serving white females from higher income backgrounds. What does that mean? What does it mean when you think about our career and technical pathways more representative of our general population, seeing more accessibility to those pathways? How do we think about that? Why do we think that is the case? You know, and we can even, as we move through the conversation today, talk about what we do with that information. What does that lead us to challenge ourselves, to challenge our colleagues, to change policies and practice to think about? So we would welcome questions, you know, whether it surprised you or whether you said that's exactly what I thought, and why that might be the case. And Mary has indicated that she is seeing some chat. Welcome back to your visual. Would love to hear what folks are saying.
Some people are saying, thank you for your attention to CTE pathways.
Yes, and there's always, you know, we look at it in the challenge and opportunities. For every challenge, there's an opportunity, but also the focus of what are our CTE pathways doing? They're clearly seen as more accessible to a larger representative of people. And for those of you who are shouting out those pathways now, even talking about why we might see that to be the case. Why are they more representative than our other pathways?
As an early college principal, I think there's a disconnect, at least where I am with the mission of the early college and dual enrollment, and the students who could successfully complete the program. Another comment is, it doesn't surprise me. Another comment is not surprising at all, especially with the female stats. I see that a lot in our own stats. I'm in a new position reporting data, so I'm curious to see other people's thoughts.
Yeah, and we're curious your thoughts as well, as when we hear things that if we're not surprised, we're consistent with other states, and you're not surprised. Are we not surprised by we're not surprised? Are we not like, why is that the case? Which obviously leads to what we can do about it as well. So we'd love to hear your thoughts about, and maybe to some extent, you know, not why are we okay with this, because we're not, right? But why, given all that we know and do, what can we do to think about this? What can we do to change those surprises or not surprises?
And another question was posed. I wonder how much is determined by gender assumptions in high school faculties. Do high school faculty steer boys towards CTE and girls towards college transfer programs?
That's a great observation about where we think people will be successful. It's very reflective of other trends we see in various disciplines, right? And girls are typically more likely to be engaged in science courses and then throughout their career steered away from those paths. So I think that's a great observation. The accessibility might be there, but our just general assumptions about who will be successful in one path versus another may be leading us to actually encourage these trends.
We also have a comment about potentially thinking about a disconnect between misinformation circulating around minority students who are not sought out as much as to participate in CCP as other groups. Also think that the high school counselors play a large part in getting information out to students. And I'm seeing that a lot by counselors who don't always give that information to students in need.
Very good point. And Sarah and I are both very interested in that counselor role and the various types of counselors, whether they're career coaches or traditional college high school counselors or any of the number of other counseling related positions in high school, and how they work together, how they're connected, to whom they're recommending. So I think that's a really good point. We're furthering some research on what are those roles, what information do those individuals have, and I've even talked to who provides education for college counselors, and do those college counselors come into those roles with the kind of information they need about diversity, equity, and inclusion as they're entering those roles in the college high school. So very good observation about those individuals who may be providing opportunities to some but not others within our high school settings.
And then just another comment has come in that we need to make sure that we're providing resources not only in English, but other languages as well. And my program doesn't offer CTE pathways. However, these numbers are comparable to what we are seeing. I think there is some unintentional bias where certain students are identified as being college ready and others are not. Removing some of those microaggressions and educating communities and families about the benefits of CE and DE courses is beneficial.
Yeah, the holistic approach, who's coming to our high school, who's coming to our colleges, in terms of working with parents to do that. And we found a lot also in our adult learner work that parents can be students themselves. And so when you're seeking to educate and offer information to parents, you're not just doing that for their high school students, but for they themselves who could be students as well. So that education. And also I appreciate the comment about the translation of materials into other languages. Seeing that really effective in attracting some of our students to community colleges is translation into Spanish and other languages, and doing that for high school students as well. So really good comments.
And then one last thing, and we can move on. Transportation challenges and access to funds for textbooks can also be contributing factors to equitable access.
Yeah, very much echoing what you said, Sarah. Tuition is free, but that does not mean this program is free. Good point. Well, thank you for those comments and just their reflections. We very much appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you, Mary, for continuing to facilitate for us. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the results that, that this body of research showed. And so we're looking again at descriptive outcomes, results from regression analyses, which include some of those student, state, and student, school, and county controls, and then that instrumental variables analysis that 58 colleges equally distant from each other. So descriptively, my data show that in addition to females being having a greater share of the participation of CCP, that they also have greater outcomes than males in all outcomes except graduation. So you'll see that graduation is higher for male students, though participation in CCP is associated with increased post-secondary attainment for both genders. So it is positive for both, just greater, more so for females. My data also show that by race, ethnicity, students who participate in CCP have positive post-secondary outcomes, but you can see here that Hispanic students have greater outcomes in all areas except for first-year GPA. So that is really interesting. And when I was reading these results, that was, I was heartened by that. Obviously, the goal is 100% for all students, but short of that, happy to see that some of the gaps that we might expect to see compared to national data are a little bit different in North Carolina for Hispanic students. And then in looking at my data by socioeconomic status, it shows that though higher income students have greater outcomes, students who have lower incomes also have increased post-secondary outcomes. And so again, the outcomes are greater for both groups, but students not on free and reduced lunch do have greater outcomes. So then when combining those results with some controls for student level characteristics, school level characteristics, and county level characteristics, I narrow in on the group of students who ever participated in CCP. So during that 2-year window when they could have participated, if they participated one time, what was their outcome? And what we see is that participation is associated with an 11.6 percentage point increase of enrolling in community college after high school. We also see that there's an 8.7 percentage point increase in the probability of those students staying enrolled semester after semester in the community college, and a 14.1 percentage point increase in the probability of graduating. And then importantly, they also had a 0.4 higher GPA in their first year after high school. And those results are all highly significant at 0.001. Then when we look at those instrumental variables assessments for all CCP students, so this is in both pathways, what we see is that it's participation in dual enrollment is associated with 24 additional credits compared to non-participants, and that's during high school and after high school. And then a 30.7 percentage point increase in the probability of graduating. So those are phenomenal, right? Like it's exactly what we want to see. They're earning more credits. We can argue later about if we hope those credits apply to a degree, so we'll set that aside for a moment, but then they're also graduating. So that tells us there's something going well with that pathway. And for those of you researchers out there, the standard errors for this analysis are clustered at the school level. There were 2 other outcomes I looked at. There was an increase in the probability of enrolling in college in general, and an increase in the probability of persistence. Both were significant at a 0.1 level, which is not sort of standard reporting in research, but they were significant at that level. So this is where we get to, I think, one of the most exciting things about the CTE pathway is that when we compare it to CTE students have even better outcomes. So what we know about CTE is that they're more representative of our state's population, the high school juniors and seniors. And on this slide, the CTE students are doing even better than the entire program at large. So participation in CTE is associated with 31 more credits than non-participants. Again, on that previous slide, we saw it was 24 for the overall population. And it's a 36.3 percentage point increased probability of graduating, again, compared to 30.7 for all students. So a few implications that I've sort of talked about throughout already, but I'll cover briefly again, is that these trends in participation really do compare to the national results. But the trends for CTE participation really reflect the population demographics of North Carolina. And I argue, and I think Dr. Jaeger may share, that this is a big opportunity for North Carolina because it could be an equity solution for us if we think about this, because the CCP participation and outcomes are so much better represented than the greater population, and their outcomes are also better. So a few policy implications, so that, though my data does not show why the participation gaps exist, it does show that CCP students are experiencing benefits from participating. And therefore, sort of a key policy implication is to maximize access to CCP so that students can experience these benefits. So for example, if African American and Black students that were in my sample had participated at the same share of their percentage of the overall population, it would have resulted in an increase of 2,254 additional graduates. And that clearly aligns with North Carolina's post-secondary attainment goal to increase the completion rates to 2 million North Carolinians. And so I have shared with you a little bit of my insights, and we will turn it back over for another piece of discussion.
We have about 7 minutes or so. We've framed a question here about, what do we do with this information? How do we use it to change policy and practice? So we're certainly interested in that feedback, but we also know that you might have questions about the data or the study as well. So both of those are welcome in terms of putting that information in the chat. But would really like to get your thoughts about, what do we see as policy implications? How do we think about this work in terms of stackable credentials? How do we build on CTE pathways to potentially degree pathways to potentially four-year bachelor's opportunities as well? So would welcome some questions and thoughts about where do we go from here? What do we do with this information? And Mary has provided for us some of the previous chats because we're unable to see them live. And so I've seen that someone we know in our NC State program, Nzinga, has been chatting. So feel free to share. She directs some CTE pathways herself and has extensive knowledge in this area. So welcome all chats.
So we have one comment. CTE plays a key role in the redesign and new initiatives. CTE allows for career exploration, hands-on training, which bridges the skills gap, gets students engaged, and interest equals motivation, and motivation equals persistence, and persistence equals retraining for students, which equals earning a credential, which makes a student more employable, which is a win-win. It's a great statement.
Absolutely. I think it connects back to what Sarah was saying at the beginning in terms of my future NC's goal and the 2 million by 2030. This equals this equals this equals this, which is exactly correct. It equals more individuals having an opportunity to attain a living wage, contributing to the economy, providing more across our state. So love those equal signs. I think in relation to some of the questions we were talking about before about advisors and counselors, I think opportunities there in terms of practice as well, not just providing knowledge to, I think we were talking about how we may be steering students to a particular pathway, but opening up that pathway in general, talking about the CTE pathway to all students is a really essential opportunity to getting a credential of value. And then how do we help career coaches and other counselors understand those pathways? Because those may be a little more complicated, may be a little more individualized, maybe less publicized or less aware even from parents. And so providing that coaching information to our guidance counselors, career coaches, and others in the high school.
And we've had a few more chats come in. Rethinking how we offer courses in high school for high school students, how we disseminate that information to students, and how we educate our communities can help close those accessibility gaps for our students as well. And then also, I think we need to better convince our high school partners of the value of CTE programs, then parents and students. We need better buy-in that is pushed from the top of the school systems. University transfer is not the only answer. And we also need to start earlier than later with informing students and families about CCP opportunities. And then we have one question that's been posed. How can we get stakeholders to get the value to integrating both tradition and non-traditional programs and degrees?
This is definitely not an answer to all of those great comments, but one thing, just the buy-in part that Cecilia Holden and my future NC are talking about is where folks are evaluated, where money goes to, are often drive conversations. So if leaders are evaluated on numbers into CTE pathways, or I know that we have, I think you had said a principal on the line about if principals are supported in their efforts to value CTE pathways, if their performance in those areas is evaluated, encouraged, it's more likely that people will be interested in doing it. So I think the comments are on, it's not a one answer, but it's the leaders, the community members, the parents, and the students themselves all being part of the conversation and encouraging CTE pathways, but encouraging CCP pathways to all students. I know you, Mary, you have likely other questions, but also know in the last minute, Sarah, if you, given your incredible research, and if you're going to leave a takeaway for the audience, which I think is spectacular. It sounds like there's post-secondary folks, secondary folks, and maybe even others on the call as well, which is wonderful.
So one of the things that I think COVID has taught us, this research has taught me, is that, if you look at that equidistant distribution of the community colleges around the state, and there are even more locations of the community colleges if you consider satellite live campuses, there is a community college near every high school in this state. And that presents a really wonderful and easy opportunity to build a relationship between the college and the high school. So we started the presentation talking about the divide that exists, but I think that some relationship building, and that, is in person meeting with each other. And it doesn't even have to be about CCP. It can be about building the relationship so that you all are good educational partners together. And I know that some of that happens, but I think that there's, if we call these unintentional outcomes, there's some intentionality that can be brought to shifting the relationships into the other direction. And so by having the colleges and the high schools partner, they can begin to talk through some of the localized solutions that make sense for that context and for those populations, because we know that everyone is out there doing their absolute best. And just like resources that get pushed into a certain direction or a certain location drive the conversation, where your attention, your priority will do the same thing. And so if those relationships are top of mind, given how easy that is to do in North Carolina, which is really unique in any other state in the country, I think there's a great opportunity there to build relationships and talk about how to better support students in the localized context.
Indeed, and we've had one question come in as well. Sarah, is your research currently published? And we, just as a note, we're right at 5 minutes before the end of our session.
Yes, I am going to stop showing my screen for a second, and I will put in the chat a couple of links. I have written some briefs, and maybe Mary can send these along. Just a few links that are publicly available so that you can explore further. And now I have lost my Zoom, and now I'm going to represent my Zoom. And I would also say, we wanted to do a collaborative session today because we wanted to have this conversation with you, and 15 minutes is not enough time to talk about all the opportunities that are available. And so we hope that you will stay in touch and engage with us about this if you have an interest. It's literally my favorite topic. I graduated a year and a half ago. I'm still talking about it. And I'd be super happy to engage, and I think Dr. Jaeger would be as well.
Yeah, there's something pretty obvious about a research brief, which Sarah posted, and I'm sure Mary is as well. It's just a short version of that, but I'll give a shout out that, you know, Sarah's dissertation is wonderful. So you could read the entire dissertation as well. I think it's an incredibly rigorous study addressing these issues and conversation. And so both and briefs as well as the full dissertation could come your way if you just emailed Sarah.
I could send you the full dissertation.
Not many people read dissertations, so it's always good to shout it out just in case someone is interested.
I apologize for not starting there.
All right, and I just shared those out in the chat. We just have some couple of comments. Wonderful research and insights. Definitely would love to talk to you, Sarah. So great feedback. Go Pack.
Nice. Well, thank you all. I hope you enjoy a quick break after you write down your email addresses to have a quick break before your next session. And it was good to share some virtual Zoom room with you today. And thanks to Mary for being our go-between.
And I'll note as well, if we want to have further discussion over lunch, there will be a networking session. And so we'll send some push notifications out for that. If you go on your attendee hub up to the community tab up at the top, there's the drop down, there's attendees and then networking. And so we'll have a virtual lunch session there that we can interact and actually have more of a collaborative session if we want to choose to do that as well.
Thanks to everyone. And yes, special thanks to Mary for being nimble on the fly and making it all happen while we're in the session.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the share.